Is your organization having a tough time determining next steps after diversity, equity, and inclusion layoffs? Hey, don't worry. We're going to talk about it. Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Guyton, your cultural competency navigator, keynote speaker, workplace trainer. Glad to have you with me today. And we're going to tackle that question of what's next if your company has decided that after George Floyd, after 2020, after all of the things that went on and all of the disruption that happened post pandemic, during the pandemic, they've decided to pull back on the DE&I work, right? They've hired staff during the time and ramped up the diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, but now the political and social pressure is off, and now they've let some people go. So what do you do if you are one of the people left behind? That's what we want to talk about today. I want to give you just a few tips to think about. You know, over the past few years, there's been a considerable focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Some organizations were already there, right? They already had the infrastructure, they already had the staffing in place. So when we faced the disruption during the global pandemic, 2019, 2020, they were ready to go, right? They responded to a lot of the social unrest, and it was a seamless transition. Other companies were behind the power curve per se, and they jumped on the bandwagon, right? They jumped on the diversity bandwagon and realized this was something that they needed to pay attention to. And so they had these massive hires, these massive initiatives. I did really well during that time. But now things have slowed down a little bit for some companies. We're in a new market where some companies are thriving, some companies are having to cut back. The job market is more competitive. And so now some key diversity, equity, inclusion positions are being eradicated. They're eliminating some of these positions. So what do you do, right? Because this work cannot stop. It's not going to stop. You can check out some of my other posts about this, but the work is going to have to continue. And a lot of times when you're in corporate America, what happens? They fire people, and you have to do twice the work, right? If you're in HR, if you are a manager that focuses on talent acquisition, talent retention, you have a problem on your hand, right? You have a problem on your hands because the work has to continue, but now you don't have all of the same people in place to do that work. So what do you do? Well, here are a few tips. Just first of all, again, convey the value of the diversity, equity, inclusion work. Many times we're really narrowly focused on what we think diversity, equity, and inclusion is. It's not just a buzzword. It's not just some reactive measure to social pressures, but it's a sound business strategy. And we have to make sure that we continue to release the full potential of this work. We want to drive productivity. We want to have a workplace that fosters innovation. So how do we continue to do that? We have to convey the value of this work. And I think part of the problem was during the massive up ramp of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that people just weren't skilled, or they were using outdated techniques. This is not the 1960s. If we're looking at diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, we are not using the same tactics that Dr. Martin Luther King used in the 1960s. Now, can we learn from those things? Yes, we can learn from some of those things, but being an activist trying to change society and trying to remold institutions is not the same as working at diversity, equity, and inclusion inside an organizational structure and trying to fix those internal processes. They're similar techniques sometimes, but they aren't the same techniques. These things are interrelated. You know, activists bring about change in one way. Internal strategists bring about change in another way, and sometimes those groups need to work together. But you have to convey the value of this work to your organization. It's not going to always be just because it's the right thing to do. And so part of what you have to convey is that disruption happens if we don't do the appropriate things as an organization. If we don't take care of our people, if we don't broaden the pool of employees that we have available, we're not going to be successful. And so conveying that value, continuing to convey the importance of this work to your organization may even help you bring back some employees that were laid off, or it'll make sure that you keep your job if you work in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion. So value, value, value. Make yourself indispensable. And how do you make yourself indispensable in an organization? Productivity, right? Productivity. Show your employer the benefit of the work that you do. Now, hey, you have to deal with the realities, right? And so when DEI specialists are gone, or when they shut that department down, somebody's going to pick up that work. And so you have to build up your internal capacities. Now, there are a number of ways to do that. Education is key. Make sure that you are requesting, budgeting for the appropriate training. Make sure you've looked at your processes, your procedures in the company. That way, the work will continue even if you don't have this standalone office. And sometimes I think the standalone offices actually hurt the work because everyone thought it was that person's responsibility, right? It's their responsibility, not my responsibility. And diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't diffused throughout the organization. So now that they're firing people, that they're streamlining these departments, that work of building effective teams, recruiting capable people is going to continue. And so you have to build up your internal capacities in order to make that happen, even if it's under another umbrella. So make sure you review those things, build that internal capacity. And of course, you can always hire outside help because you can't do everything. That's why there are people like me, other specialists out there that you can bring in. And it's a lot more affordable a lot of times than a paid employee, a full-time employee, right? Because you just pay consultants for the work that they do. The work is very targeted. You can evaluate them based on the desired outcomes. It's an easy way, an affordable way to build that capacity. But you're going to have to build that capacity, right? Because you can't do all the things that you've been doing on a regular basis and then continue to support this diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Now, part of that building internal capacity means making inclusion everyone's responsibility, or I like to say share the love. You got to share the love, right? We're in this thing together in the workplace. We are in some ways a family. And so in the face of these layoffs, we want to make sure the burden isn't solely placed on, again, another department like HR or other managers, but we have to make sure it's everyone's responsibility. There are many ways that you can do this, but again, training, education is a big piece of it, but you have to create a culture where everyone participates. And maybe you depend on some of your employee resource groups or other programs that you have in the organization to pick up this load and to let people know what's going on. Again, we have to make inclusion a part of our values, a part of what we do as a company, and people also need to know when their efforts are successful. Like, don't do all this work and then people are like, hey, did we achieve our goals? Measure these things, set some milestones so that people understand the win, right? You have to understand the win in all of this so people know that they're making progress, and also so the bosses see it's worth the time and energy that you're spending in this work. The other thing that I hope that you do that will help you survive these layoffs is nurture innovation through your inclusion efforts. Be creative. Find ways of engaging people at all levels of the organization. Again, get feedback from people so that your supervisors understand the positive impact that this work has on the organizational culture. So talk to people, get feedback, and use that feedback to drive and nurture innovation in the workplace. I don't know what you think diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. It's not just about, oh, kumbaya and making people feel good. No, it's about making people effective, helping people to understand where they belong. It's about tapping into the gifts that people bring to the organization. And so, again, you have to clearly communicate what your desired outcomes are, but also get feedback and input from the people that you're serving, that are people that are part of your organization. You may even have to talk to your employees about the changes that are occurring and asking them how you'll make up the difference. How will you fill the gap if your company has fired employees, if they've let go of certain departments? Now, how do you keep people? That may be a challenge, because when you start laying off people, the people that are left behind start getting a little nervous, right? And so you have to show employees that they are valued during this time. Maybe you need that reassurance. Maybe you are this close to the chopping block. I'm not sure. Maybe you need that reassurance. But clear communication is crucial, especially explaining the reasons behind the layoffs. Now, it's going to be tough, right? Because prior to 2023, people were like, hey, diversity, equity, inclusion is important. We value our employees. And now 2023, people are saying, hey, we need to cut back, and this is what we're going to cut first. So it does show somewhat of a prioritization. And so many employees might have joined your organization because of your inclusion policies. How are you going to keep those people? What are you going to tell them? And next, it's going to impact your recruitment efforts too. So refocus the message that you send in regards to recruitment. With layoffs, there often comes a shift in recruitment strategy. So be mindful that your new hires might need reassurance that they're not going to be the next ones to get the axe, right? Yeah, this company is great. That's what you say. This company is great to work for. We love our employees. But if the societal winds change direction, we're going to get rid of everyone in this department. How are you going to communicate you're not going to do that? How are you going to communicate with new employees and any possible negative feedback you get from the people that were let go? You may have some disgruntled employees that you're letting go. And so this may be a hard task for you. You're going to have to prove that you are committed to inclusion at the same time you're laying off people. That's your dilemma. That's the quandary. How are you going to communicate that you're still committed to these things if you are phasing out people that used to do that work? So have a strategy. Get with your communication department. But this could impact your recruitment and even the retention of employees that you already have and that you want to hold on to. People get nervous when you start firing people. You may be nervous watching this. So hopefully these tips have been helpful to you. I want to leave you with a quote from Seth Godin, and it says, change making happens when people fall in love with a different version of the future. So as you think about the layoffs, as you think about the future of your organizations, people may have fallen in love with your commitment to inclusion, your DE&I efforts, and now you're changing that. So be mindful that will have a ripple effect in your organizations. May not be immediate. It may take some time for those ripples to happen, but it's going to happen. People depend on organizations to keep their word. People believe the promises that we make as leaders, and so sometimes you do have to go in a different direction. And as a leader, I understand that. As finances change, as customer expectations change, you may have to change your strategies, but you're going to have to communicate that to the people that are still working for you. How are you going to show that you are still committed to them, that you still care about inclusion, and that you still care about them? So hopefully this has helped you just a little bit. My name is Glenn Guyton, your Cultural Competency Navigator. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great one. Bye-bye.